One of the most prominent stories of the Second World War was the Soviet use of women snipers during the conflict. Around 2,500 female snipers worked during World War II to take out many Germans, and around 500 of them survived the war. They claimed a combined kill count of around 11,000 Germans, but women performed a number of different roles in the Soviet Red Army. Many were medics, but there was an order passed to German officers to carry out the executions of women found fighting against the German army during World War II. This led to hundreds of women being executed, and before this tortured for information. So join us today as we look at the execution of Soviet women soldiers, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The 1917 Russian Revolution gave Russian women legal equality, and this meant they were given the right to work as hard as men, and also many women joined the army as the Second World War broke out, hoping to take the fight to the Germans. Now the fact that the Soviets had women fighting in the war was a great offence to those within Nazi Germany. The expectations and ideals for women in Nazi Germany were incredibly different to those within the Soviet Union. Hitler sought for women to be traditional housewives, staying at home and raising many children, being subservient to their husbands. For the Germans, women fighting in the Red Army showed that the Communists and the Soviets were not just incredibly dangerous, but also very backwards in their ideals and their plans for society. Because of this, women who fought and were captured by the Germans were treated awfully. The thought to allow women to take up arms was seen as a horrific policy of communism by the Germans, and this contributed to women being treated terribly as they fell into enemy hands. They were looked on terribly, being given derogatory nicknames, and seeing women in uniform was attributed to evil by the Germans. The strong views that they had contributed to targeting of Soviet women soldiers, who were shown as treacherous, and that they wished to bring harm on traditional values. It wasn't just the Nazis who held these values, the ordinary German military values were also disgusted with the fact that women were taking up arms against them. Shortly after the invasion of the Soviet Union took place, Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge issued an order that stated that all women in uniform were to be shot in line with the Nazi ideologies. They believed that female soldiers were true examples of Bolshevism. This order was later rescinded, but the execution of many women did take place. This order was illegal, and many other orders were issued against the women in the Soviet Union. Many other German generals issued that women should be shot dead or hanged from the nearest tree. There were around 800,000 women who served in the Soviet armed forces, which made up around 5% of the whole military. The number of women rose as the war went on, and many did perform jobs in the healthcare sector, caring for soldiers as nurses, doctors and medical officials. At first, when the Germans attacked the Soviet Union in June 1941, many women were turned away and denied the right to serve. However, due to the heavy losses sustained by Operation Barbarossa, the attitudes were changed, and many women who wished to fight were given the right to. There was a number of Russian air crews established with female regiments, taking part in air battles and combat missions during World War II. One group were involved in fighting over Stalingrad, and more regiments were involved in bombing German targets, with women being handed over the controls of the planes. Initially, 3 regiments were planned to be female exclusive, and many had hundreds of airwomen inside them. Now, the most famous deployment of women inside the Red Army was the use of snipers. Women were also used in different infantry roles, but snipers were most remembered. There were almost 2,500 female snipers, and they achieved a notorious reputation as a feared weapon of war. For example, Lyudmila Pavlichenko racked up 309 confirmed kills, a remarkable achievement. Women weren't just snipers in the military, many served as normal soldiers such as machine gunners, and performed other roles such as tank drivers. There were also female anti-aircraft batteries manned, especially within Stalingrad, who also engaged in combat on the ground against the enemy. Stalin allowed women to join the second lines of defence, manning AA guns and providing medical aid, and through this many joined the Second World War and gained credibility and respectability. It was within the Partisans that many women found service, especially on the front lines and even behind enemy lines, taking out communications used by the Germans. Within the Partisans, women were seen as equals, and because of this they saw service, often taking up arms as normal soldiers and guerrilla fighters would. There were a number of women executed who did take part in partisan activities. These were treated terribly by the enemy. One of these was Lepa Radic, a young girl who took part in sabotage operations against the Germans. She was arrested and tortured by the Germans before she was offered a chance to give information over, but she continued to refuse, and in front of a large crowd she was hanged by German officers. She was placed on a box with a noose around her neck, offered one final chance to give over information, but refused, and the box was kicked out. Another partisan, Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, was just 18 when she was executed by the Germans. She volunteered to join the Partisans, but she worked behind enemy lines and worked in territory occupied by the Germans. She was arrested during a combat mission near a village and was horrifically tortured and humiliated, but she refused to give away any names of partisans and co-conspirators. She was sentenced to death and during her final words to a crowd said, "There are 200 million of us, you can't hang us all," before she was executed. Zinaida Portnova was another partisan who joined up at the age of 15. She was visiting her family when the Germans invaded and became stuck behind the enemy lines. She then worked to smuggle and hide weapons and distribute propaganda, along with carrying out sabotage, but during a shootout she was captured. She shot one of her captures but was caught. She was then tortured but was later driven into a forest and executed, but some speculate that she was tortured to death, rather than being shot in the head. Masha Bruskina was a Belarusian volunteer nurse who cared for Soviet forces and helped them escape. She worked in a hospital set up to care for wounded Soviet soldiers, and she helped to smuggle civilian clothing to these men, along with false papers. They then escaped, but Masha was eventually betrayed and arrested. The authorities decided that a public execution would be a good way to deter the local public of conducting this sort of activity, and the Germans forced her to march through the streets with a harrowing placard that said, "We are partisans," and shot at German troops, shaming her. She was then taken to the gates of a yeast brewery and distillery and was hanged along with two others, with her body being left out for 3 days, with the Germans continuously refusing to cut her down. Tatayana Baramzina was a Soviet sniper who was later awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union Award, the highest medal available in the Soviet Union. She took part in an assault force, but was wounded in a battle against German forces and retreated to a rye field to recover. She defended herself along with other soldiers, opening up on them with a machine gun, killing a number of them, before running out of ammunition. 2 German soldiers entered a dugout where she was, and they shot injured soldiers before Tatayana was captured. She was then stabbed and mutilated with bayonets and beaten savagely with a rifle butt, before she was shot in the head with an anti-tank grenade. Ksenia Konstantinova was a medic who was also awarded the Hero of the Soviet Union. She was an army volunteer who was sent for infantry training and saw action as a medic on the Eastern Front. She was very brave carrying wounded soldiers, but was badly wounded in battle. She killed 12 enemy soldiers before she sustained a head injury, but when she was taken prisoner, she refused to give over any information about the Soviet operations in the area. She was then horrifically tortured and mutilated before being stabbed and pinned to the ground with a stake through her body. She was then found like this, but buried with full military honours. Yelizaveta Chaikina was a member of the Partisans, and she was involved in leading partisan groups. Her small detachment raided Axis strongholds and gathered intelligence from recon missions. She was sent to Pano to find out the size of enemy garrisons, but on the way she was seen and informed onto the enemy. Chaikina was then taken prisoner and was tortured, before she was taken outside and shot. She was just a long line of partisans who were executed by the Germans after they were tortured and interrogated. The partisans were ultimately seen as a very dangerous group and were feared by the Germans, and they executed many very quickly. There were a huge number of female Soviet soldiers who were executed during the Second World War by the Germans. Regardless of whether they were members of the Red Army or partisans, the decree and instruction was made to execute the women in uniform virtually on sight. Partisans were always interrogated to gain more information about the local resistance groups, but their downfall was always met brutally. Many were hanged and many were shot, but many were also butchered in horrifically savage scenes. These executions were against the rules of war and were considered a war crime, but after the conflict, very few of these soldiers who executed these women were brought to justice, and very few faced up to their crimes. Women had an incredibly important role within the Red Army, and this was something the Nazis could not accept, as it went completely against their values and ideals, and they saw the use of women in the military as a sadistic and backwards policy of Bolshevism and communism. Ultimately, the policy to allow women to join the military brought a huge number of women to the forefront of the conflict and brought them into the fight against Nazi Germany, along with making a number of these heroes during World War II. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.